Annual Meeting. Really appreciate everybody coming online. I know this doesn't have the look or the feel of Thompson's Point, but at least we have something to look forward to, and that's we'll be back there next year in 2021. So that's something that certainly we can look forward to a year from now. Despite the virtual meeting aspect, we do have a very special guest presenting to us today. Keefe Harrison is the CEO of the Recycling Partnership, and Keefe brings a very unique perspective on the recycling industry. Why is this so unique? Because, I think their partners include so many businesses and organizations that many of us are quite familiar with. This includes, Kellogg's, Coca-Cola, Target, Amazon, Walmart, Poland Spring. I mean, that's just to name a few. You can go to their website and you can see the many, many organizations who are partnering together to advance recycling. Troy will be introducing Keefe in just a few minutes, but I wanted to take a moment and mention something that really struck me about the Recycling Partnership. It's on the very front page of their website, and it reads, and I quote, "We at the Recycling Partnership stand with Black people and people of color. We stand against racism. Today and in all the days to come, our mission is to advance recycling and carry a flag for social justice, including the right to pursue a healthier and more sustainable life. We call on our community, company, and industrial partners to listen, learn, and do more to uphold equality. We pledge to do the same." Keefe Harrison, CEO of the Recycling Partnership. When I read these words, I found them to be very powerful, but also in reflection, I found what I realized after reading this was that I have not done enough to uphold equality. I can do more. I know I can do more. So I too will take the pledge to do more to uphold equality. And so will ecomaine in every decision that we make. So thank you, Keefe, for your leadership and for making a difference, and for your words of wisdom right there on the front page of your website. That's very much appreciated. A few more remarks covering this past year. When we were together last year at Thompson's Point, in my concluding remarks, I outlined a vision for 2020. And this included several things, but 5 of them that I'd like to mention. First is the electric waste hauling trucks. They have been ordered. We talked about landfill solar. The contract has been signed. We talked about fire detection and remote controlled response to keep our employees and the community safe. That has been fully installed. We talked about an outreach goal of personally reaching 50,000 residents. That has been achieved. In fact, it's a 37% increase over 2019. One data point that really impresses me is that we had 150 media stories over the last year. What a job by Matt Grondin and his outreach team. These are stories that are read and really promote the mission that ecomaine supports. We also envisioned that recycling markets would recover, and I must say that this was really more of hope than vision, but they have recovered to some degree, and certainly we are on the right track. Just as a reminder, if you're not speaking, if you could mute so that there's no background noise, it would be appreciated. The one thing that wasn't included in our vision last year was a pandemic, a challenge that each and every one of us has had to deal with in many different ways. But with all our accomplishments this year, the one that I'm most proud of is our response to COVID-19. We knew when the crisis hit that we needed a way to safely continue our operations and continue the flow of trash and recyclable materials that we have come to manage over the years. We knew that interrupting these services would be devastating to our communities. Our employees came through for us. Our board of directors came through for us with their support and their trust in the way we run our organization. The hauling community came through for us, and together we found our way, and we avoided creating another health crisis by not allowing the waste we manage to get in the way. And I can say with confidence today that the waste or recyclable materials have not gotten in anyone's way. One of my proudest moments was when the CDC director, Dr. Narev Shah, stated that the steps that we took to physically distance here in the ecomaine workplace were exemplary. By taking this advice from the CDC and the Cumberland County Emergency Management Agency, and even more importantly, by executing this advice on each and every close encounter, we were able to keep our employees safe, our contractors safe, and our customers safe. Our vision for 2021 remains clear: making our new electric waste hauling trucks powered by trash a reality, installing solar panels at the landfill, strengthening recycling by recovering more tons from more communities in order to meet the increasing demand that the future brings, advocating for better solid waste policy in our capital, also at the federal level, in particular at the state level, advocating for 988, which remains our focus. If you recall, that is the bill that encourages the waste hierarchy, which obviously puts recycling well above landfilling. Giving the city of Westbrook a warm welcome to the ecomaine team of communities. We are so excited that they are going to be on board July 1st. Continuing our commitment to outreach, even if it means by doing it in a different way, and not letting our guard down on the coronavirus. Masking up and physical distancing remains a priority for each and every one of us. Perhaps most importantly, again, is taking the pledge to do more to uphold equality in every decision we make. So I thank you for your support in making this vision a reality in 2020, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you to accomplish our goals. I will now turn it over to Troy Moon, who will introduce our guest speaker. Troy.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. The City of Portland and the Recycling Partnership worked together a couple of years ago to roll out the City of Portland's CART program. We were the beneficiaries of a financial grant to help us purchase the carts, but I think more importantly, they were a great partner in developing an education program. We worked really closely with the team at ecomaine and the Recycling Partnership team to reach out to residents, to develop some really great materials, and I think that's one of the things that really helped make the CART rollout work so well. And having the carts has been a great boon for us. Before we went forward with that, we did a study, and we learned that we worked with a professor at USM and some students and did a study. And we learned that over a ton a week of trash and loose recycling was spilling from our recycling bins around the city, and causing a real environmental issue with the litter that was ultimately blowing into Casco Bay. So we had to do something, and Recycling Partnership stepped up and helped us implement that. As we've moved forward, Chris Branch, our Public Works Director, and the team have been able to implement automated collection, which has made it more efficient and helped worker safety. So overall, the program has been a great success, and we really have Recycling Partnership to thank for that. So thank you very much, Keefe, for your support of our program. And it's a real pleasure to introduce Keefe today as our guest speaker. As Kevin mentioned, she's the founder and CEO of the Recycling Partnership, which is currently a $100 million nonprofit dedicated to protecting the planet by fixing recycling and activating a circular economy in the United States. And she's an international speaker, media pundit, and environmental author. And she's been working in the solid waste space for about 20 years. And before she came to recycling, Keefe had some interesting jobs. She once worked on a logging crew in North Carolina. She's researched sea turtles in Costa Rica, and she's studied reindeer husbandry in Finland. Now, as she mentioned in some of our conversation before the meeting, she lives in New Hampshire with her family, some rescue dogs, and some feisty backyard hens. So I'm very pleased to pass the mic over to Keefe Harrison, CEO of the Recycling Partnership.
Thank you, Troy, and thank you, Kevin. Kevin, your intro was very moving, but I also was writing notes here about all the things that you've accomplished. And I would love to do more to help highlight those, because I think too often there's a message of distress in our field and not a willingness to capture the ingenuity of our serious problem solvers that we have here. And so that's one of my missions, is to try and make that better known. I'd like to share some slides with you today. I have delivered those, so hopefully you're seeing a screen now with a presentation. Great. So I delivered this to Kevin and team by PDF so that I could share this with you guys afterwards. At the end of the deck, I also included a number of slides with some of our more recent data from various reports and research study, because I used to run a recycling program, and I always was hungry for information for what's going on outside of my scope so that I could do some comparisons, and then some slides on resources. So if you're not familiar about all our free tools and resources, then I included those there. But I think that one of the things that's different about this platform online versus a more traditional stage platform is you can interrupt more easily and ask a question, or give break up the monologue. So I hope that if there's something that comes to mind, you unmute yourself and you pipe up there and say, well, wait a minute, what about? And then we'll dig into that. But when I'm very honored to be here today, and it is nice to be speaking one state over. My family's lived in New Hampshire about 6 years now. We were in California before that, and then South Carolina. So we're relatively new to New England. I still like the winters. And I love where I live in Walpole, New Hampshire. It's right on the Vermont line, and it's a beautiful part of the world. So when I was prepping for this with Kevin, it was nice to have a good conversation about, what is on your mind and what are you interested in. And Kevin, I think what I heard from you is that it would be helpful to understand what's going on from the corporate point of view. What are we seeing from corporate commitments, producer responsibility? I just was reading, it's corporate sustainability report time. So I got PepsiCo's this morning, and I was flipping through that, trying to see what their new pledges are. So I thought I'd speak today from the corporate perspective, and starting first with who funds us. So we're a fiercely mission-driven nonprofit. We're 6 years old. 6 years ago, we had 6 funding partners, and now we have more than 50. And in that time, we've raised, as Troy said, we've raised more than $100 million that we're turning right around into grants and resources, free tools for community, state, and regional programs like ecomaine. And these companies, we work very hard to have a full representation of the supply chain. So you'll see some companies in here who are fierce producers of materials and sometimes gets challenged because they don't have a strong environmental standing or history. We welcome them to our table, all our funding partners, because we ask them 3 questions. 1, do you believe in our mission? 2, are you willing to fund it? Because that's how they walk the walk, right? Is by putting money behind things. And 3, are you willing to play well with others? Because this is not something that can just be solved for one material or one company. It has to be a collaborative effort. And with that, we get to work advancing our mission. I did a TEDx talk on this of what does it mean to take corporate dollars? Do I have to scrub my soul at the end of each night? And I really think that we need more nonprofits like the partnership, because when we want to look to our corporate partners to hold them accountable, they don't know how to work in the space that we work in, right? That they don't know your day to day. So we want them to do things that are meaningful, so they need action partners. And so our job is to, when we see a sustainability pledge, it's our job to insist and assist them in getting there. It's not an either or. We are not an activist organization, we are an action-focused organization, but we definitely speak truth to power and hold them accountable. So in 6 years, we've measured our year-over-year impacts, and a few things to point out is we were excited to work with Troy to help deliver carts But those are some of the more than 700,000 carts that we've put on the ground since then. We require curbside recycled content in those carts. And we also are we're working, just working on a cart grant for Baltimore, Maryland. And we had to get really creative because they had a big funding need. So we also worked on a resin donation from Dow to go directly to the cart manufacturer. 9 railroad cars of resin are leaving the Dow plant, being donated to the cart producer so that the price of the cart comes way down. So we get really creative in how we reach our metrics. We have reached more than half of the US population with our tools in 6 years. Everything we do with our granting partners are available for free. We make everything open source and try to spread them as wide as possible. And ultimately, why do we do this work? Well, we figure that this is our piece of the pie of fighting climate change. So we look at the circular economy and waste and from that perspective. So I think you all are familiar with the term circular economy. It's the pivot from the traditional economy of take, make waste to a circular one where the end of life is decided at point of design, which means that right now recycling is a reaction, right? When there's a big enough pile of one like material that an entrepreneur can figure out how to turn it into something new and make money off of it, then we get the environmental benefits. We want a more systematic approach that considers that all in from the future, which means that you're not working so hard to try and figure out how to overcome the challenges, that the system is working for you. So we've released a number of reports lately, and if you've not seen our 2020 State of Curbside Recycling Report, there's a little bit of drop-off information in there as well, but it is referenced as a curbside report. We focus, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, we focus on residential recycling for the bulk of our effort, but that's both drop-off, multifamily, and single-family curbside collection. But when we're talking to our corporate funders, some of the things that we cut through right away is we want to be realist with them. We want to make sure that they are not candy coating the fact that 20 million tons of material end up in the trash every year, that only half of Americans have access to recycling on par with trash. So in Walpole, New Hampshire, I haul my trash. I also haul my recycling. We would call that 100% on par because I have the same behavior, but half of Americans don't enjoy that. And we speak loud and clear that many communities are paying more and more for their programs. And in many places, it's significantly more than landfill costs. So as city budgets continue to get pressed from the economic fallout of coronavirus, how will they be able to maintain that sustainable funding for recycling? That's a serious concern that we want producers to understand and take a part in resolving. We also want to make sure that we want them to know that, they like to sometimes come to us in terms of education campaigns and carts on the ground. We think about it as a system, and contamination really matters because we want the economics of the whole system to really matter. And then the final piece is something that I said earlier about collaboration, that ultimately this has to land in as everyone's role, meaning anyone involved in the supply chain, not just on the backs of local governments who are really doing the hero's effort. So we try to be really a fierce advocate for you and about the realities of what you're facing. So you've heard me talk about systems approach. Everything that we do is system driven. And we think about that as we're trying to solve problems where you can't just solve for collection unless you solve for sortation. You can't solve for consumer education unless you solve for end markets. So these are the pieces that we think about when we talk about a systems approach. That's why we're partnering with a number of global initiatives like the UN Environment and also the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So we are in the process of tying a bow around setting up the US Plastics Pact. So if you're familiar with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, they are an initiative to advance the circular economy and have hundreds of brands and companies who have signed up on pledges to use more recycled content, invest in recycling, think about their design, work on reuse and reduce models in addition to just recycling, and really advance to that circular economy. And in order to set that up, there are country and regional pacts where they align around common goals. Together with the World Wildlife Fund, we're the lead NGO on the US Plastic Pact. And so we're making sure that this primarily European model, though it is active in Asia and South America too, as it advances into the US, is aligned with the way that we do business. Because the way that the US approaches recycling is very different than other countries. So, any questions about that? I wanted to dig deeper into some findings and reports about how we push them, and then talk a little bit more about policy and their perspective. So any questions before I go there? Okay, so in our recent Bridge to Circularity report, we had 3 main findings that we pound day after day with our funding partners and the whole corporate landscape. Yesterday, I was on a webinar with As You Sow, which, if you're familiar with them, they're an activist organization that's also a shareholder organization, and they use their shares to hold companies accountable. They just produced a report grading companies on their sustainability, how effectively they're meeting their sustainability goals. And whenever I'm with a group that's trying to push companies to do something, I always ask them to what do we intend them to do, and with whom, and for what? So we wrote the Path to Circularity to give a roadmap of when we want companies to do something about this, what does that mean? So our first finding is that the speed of innovation of how packaging and potential recyclables as designed far outstripped the system, and recycling is a reaction, and it's never going to respond to the rate of innovation if there's no controls on that. So we set up the Pathway to Circularity. Last year I did a piece with Morning Edition where it was 90 minutes on mic, and we went through a grocery store and we had the microphones tucked in our coats because we didn't quite have permission, but we spent 90 minutes where the reporter over and over again said, is this recyclable? And we go to a new shelf, is this recyclable? And my answer pretty regularly was no, not yet, or not in most places. And that piece was produced as a 6-minute piece, and NPR, I think, since then has done a number of very good pieces on our collective field. But I left with a renewed sense of passion of how full the grocery store was of things that no MRF would ever want on their own. Their chip bags, their wraps, their multi-layers, their pouches. And that future of collecting those will never come to us if we wait for it. So we built the Pathway to Circularity and launched 3 main work streams: films and flexibles, tubes, and polypropylene. So polypropylene is very close to universal recycling. Films and flexibles are very far from universal recycling, but we are working on amassing the whole supply chain that produces those around those materials to say, we need your help in fixing it. And again, you can't just message your way or label your way or design your way into recyclability. We work hard to talk about that system. You have to think about the packaging fate, those are in markets. The capture journey, how does it go through a MRF and get to a reprocessor? Design, what goes into that? Prevalence, part of it is if there's only a few of packaging type, it's never going to be worth your effort to sort it because you're never going to get critical mass. And we really walk them through that you have to solve for the first 4 before you can talk to the MRF and the community about truly adopting it. So this is the way that we're really advancing the problem solving, and we call this the Pathway to Circularity. And this is a new initiative as of last year, still gaining momentum, but we start them with a hard reality check in phase 1 of there's no silver bullets, this isn't wishful thinking, this is hard work. So that's the number 1 is we've got to do work to change the outcome. Number 2 is that in its current form, the recycling system in this country just can't meet the demands of companies that are pledging for them. So there's so many companies that have pledged to use recycled PET that it far outstrips the supply. That doesn't mean that the supply isn't there. It means that the economics of getting it to there are not playing out, and there's a hyper competition for the same amount of rPET, recycled PET. This is at the same time that landfills are cheaper, and cheaper compared to recycling than they've ever been, and virgin resin is basically free right now. And so if we're going to really talk about what it means to address circularity, we cannot ignore virgin resin, nor can we ignore disposal costs. So we work with our funding partners to understand that, and ask how they're going to be helped to be accountable for those solutions. We also work on the true economics of curbside, or as this says curbside, but it's all recycling. Our system-wide approach relies on local governments paying the bill, doing the work, solving the problems. And I'm deeply concerned about the long-term. Sometimes the press calls me and they ask me, they want me to justify why this was set up this way, and I can't. If we were designing a system from start right now, this is probably not how we do it, because it's very hard to sustain. And also, let's think about what recycling is. Recycling is a supply chain for manufacturing, right? With recycling, we're trying to create a feedstock that competes on quality, quantity, and cost to make something new. But we are realists and we are practical today, and so this is what we're dealing with. But that's why we're advancing policy initiatives that bring producers to the table for a universal contribution to make sure that they are advancing solutions. And we have a white paper coming out next month. But I will say that, from a producer point of view, and the conversations we're having with them are radically different than where they were 18 months ago. And I think that they're progressing in a way that brings them to the table with their pocketbooks ready to make change. So before we go into conversation, the strategies that we're thinking about recycling 2.0, right? This needs a reboost. So we're thinking about how we use our model to gain greater support of community recycling programs. We're thinking about how we advance state and federal recycling policies. We're investing in we want them to invest in domestic end markets so that we have a diversity of carbon safe end markets. It's not just that it goes away, but that it gets repurposed into something meaningful that advances our mission to fight climate change. We are interested in citizen and consumer engagement, but that can't be first. We can't just tell our people what to do. We have to make sure that they can do it and that the outcomes are viable before we ever engage the public. And then we want to continue to add innovation to how we collect. And you guys were, during Kevin's intro, you're talking about that innovation in the form of your trucks and your solar charging panels. And the final piece is partnership is part of our name for a reason. Broad stakeholder engagement from everyone who's creating the chemicals that make the resins, all the way through the MRFs and the communities that collect it. We need to have everyone at the table being part of a solution if we're going to build a robust one. So I wanted to make sure you knew how to get in touch with me. If you have questions after this or ideas, if you're a Twitter person, Troy, I see you on social media. That's my handle, or there's my email. And I would normally say, since we're nearby, we could also get a cup of coffee, but maybe someday we could do that. But for our discussion, I just wanted you to know that I brought a lot of data of what's in the cart, how do we know how it converts, what do we know about the US landscape, all of these sort of things that I thought some of you might be data hounds out there. And so if those are important for our discussion, great. If not, then I'll just give them to you to use for how you need. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what do you expect to see from producers, and how would you like to see the partnership handling our relationship with them? I'd love to hear more from you.
I have a question. Thanks, Keefe. This is Troy. It was a very interesting presentation, and I was intrigued by your note that industry partners are kind of changing their tune and coming around to positions they may not have held several months ago. And so one of the things we're finding, with the markets the way they are, is it's financially extremely challenging for ecomaine and for municipalities to, continue to can you continue to support recycling even though, we understand it's important and it's a vital service? One thing that the state of Maine, was thinking about last session before the COVID pandemic kind of shut things down was a product stewardship bill that would have, asked producers to help fund recycling programs. And I'm wondering, again, in the past, that's something that producers have been very reluctant to get behind. So are you seeing movement in that? Is that something we might see as a model similar to what we see in Canada and the European Union?
Yep. How do we talk to producers about what you're facing? Here's an example of market value that we track. This is MRF-based market value, primarily curbside, but these are through, we have NDAs with MRFs who share their data with us. So when a company comes to us and says, well, communities make money off the recycling, we talk about the collection costs of, it can be 80, collection, MRF processing costs vary $80 to $100 a ton, and that's another, you add to that another $80 a ton for a city to collect it and get it to the front door of the MRF, you've got to have a lot of value. So we get to work really dispelling that myth that you guys are sitting on a money-making machine here from all your recyclables. And we talk about really the gap between what's needed. So why do we see a shift in producer interest? Well, because a lot of companies have made really big goals. They've pledged to get every bottle back, or 100%, they're only going to produce 100% recyclable packaging by sometimes as soon as 2025. And so whenever they do that, we talk about, is your goal to just design something that could happen in a perfect system? Or is your goal to make sure that it happens? If your goal is to make sure that it actually happens and you're securing that RPET for your containers, for example, then you've got work to do. We're also doing work with the Federal Trade Commission, who to date, how do they measure if something is or isn't recyclable? They're interested in how companies make a recyclability claim and whether it's misleading to the public. And the only way that they've had to measure that thus far has been access to recycling. So how is access measured? If there's one drop off in a county, then that county has 100% access to the material, even if that recycling is, or even if their trash is collected front of door. We are trying to break down that access number, because that's a false, that's a good piece of information, but that is a false indicator of robust recycling health. So we've done a lot of work over the years, and as companies have made these big goals, they then go through the 7 stages of grief of understanding how hard that is. And they understand that if they've made billions of dollars producing billions of somethings, then it's going to take more than $100,000 to get it back. So I think they're understanding that they have a bigger role to play. The big question that they're all saying is this, it can't just be us, it needs to be others. So when we talk to the petro companies, we're talking about what's your wedge of the cost pie. Because I don't think it's just brands. I don't think it's just Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola. I think that if there are companies that are producing the chemicals and the resins that go into all these products, and they're projecting that they're only going to make more and more and more and more and more plastic, then they need to pay a wedge of the pie that relates to what the brands are doing. That there will still be a government component to that wedge, but right now the governments have too big a wedge, that there needs to be a much smaller piece of that. So there is a change. We started having conversations with companies, starting with just a few at a time. And we said there are 4 major headwinds to recycling that won't be resolved without you. 1, landfills are cheap. 2, communities can't pay. Not all communities can pay for this, nor can they in the future. 3, that not all producers are at the table, only a few of them. And 4, we need serious investment funds for the infrastructure for it to work better. So we've designed policy approaches that address those. Now, if you start raising landfill costs, that could make that could be a burden for communities. So we need to make sure that we're looking at how landfills fund recycling programs, and how we tie those together in a better way so that there's not the unintended consequence of pain. But as we've had those conversations with brands, we keep expanding that circle out. And we're actively talking about partial penny per package, legislated, mandated programs. And each time we expand the circle, they look to one another to see if this is legit, and we just keep growing that out and out. So it is changing. I will say though, Troy, I don't see a single EPR model that we know how to pull off the shelf and plug and play. So I'm very familiar with what Maine was working on, and Risa Domino with RS was working a lot with the ecomaine stuff. She's also working with ours, or with the Maine legislation and with ours. I don't see, when like the webinar I was on yesterday, people were like, we just need EPR. And I say, well, which one? There isn't just one. And I really don't see a plug and play singular model. I think that we need something that is more multifaceted. But again, we have to start with, what are the headwinds? What are we trying to solve? And what could we solve with policy that we couldn't solve any other way?
Keefe, this is Kevin. I've often advocated, for, really taking advantage of the infrastructure that we already have as a tool. And for, 20 years now, we're kind of recycling the same items. And I've always wanted more and more producers to steer their packaging toward readily recyclable packaging. The 10 items that we're collecting, that are being collected in most recycling programs, really haven't changed in 20 years. So why can't the industry really try to stream those materials that are more readily recyclable? I even look at the polypropylene. I don't really know of any MRFs that I'm familiar with that have widespread mainstream polypropylene recycling. But yet we can recycle, HDPE, and we can recycle PET. Why don't we push that packaging in the direction that's already available? Tin cans, aluminum cans, corrugated boxes, mixed paper, all those things are available. And we're struggling right now with seeing reductions at our recycling facility, which makes recycling for our member communities more expensive as our volume continues to go down. So I don't know if you could comment to that.
Yep, we have those conversations with them a lot. So this slide shows the outcomes of our capture rate studies. So instead of relying on EPA data or generation data, we do capture rates, which mean we go through programs and we actually touch we will choose a series of routes. We'll pull all the material from the trash and recycling for those routes. And we'll count every single item. And what we're trying to do is get a baseline for how much trash is in the recycling and how much recycling is in the trash. And we do that before and after our exercises so we can measure change in the purest way. But along the way, it's given us really amazing insight into misconceptions that have allowed us to dispel some of the misconceptions of producers. For instance, the can guys thought all their cans were definitely getting captured because they're worth so much and they're beautiful, right? Like they love their cans, and so surely no one would be throwing those away. But even in Denver, Colorado, we saw half the cans were ending up in the trash. So we use information about what's in the canister to talk, or what's in the recycling bin to show us about what's changing. So there's always the discussion about should they design for recycling, or should recycling react to innovation in packaging? And I really don't think that argument of like who should serve the other one is really ever going to get there. I think this is where the circular economy comes in, where companies are signing on to stop using certain materials like PVC. They're signing on to prioritize materials that can get recycled and then problem solve for the things that are very close, like polypropylene. In our country, polypropylene was more often part of a 3 through 7 bale that was getting shipped off shores. Now what we're seeing is MRFs are actually, in many places, sorting that polypropylene primarily for a domestic or Canadian market. And we see that as good progress. But there is some shift. But Kevin, pouches are so cheap to produce, they're light to ship, their carbon footprint, even if they end up getting thrown away, every brand will tell you that the LCAs show that it's far better to ship in a shelf-stable pouch versus a can or a jar, because of the shipping costs. They're also, so they're cheaper to make, cheaper to ship, lighter to ship, and they're easy to design. You know, they're very glossy and appealing to a consumer. And so what we say is, you know, well, when you look at those LCAs, I've never seen an LCA that has whale health in it, right? Like, what an LCA only measures what they want it to measure. What's the overall impact of trash residue, of landfills, of trash and water? I started off, as Troy mentioned, doing sea turtle research in North Carolina and Costa Rica. And at that point, there was only one plastic gyre. Now there are more than 5, and it's just universal. It's everywhere at this point. And last year, I was on a research vessel that took corporate executives into the middle of the Sargasso Sea. So it was 50 kilometers east of Bermuda. We flew into Bermuda, took the research vessel east, 50 kilometers into the Sargasso, so floating plants where sea turtles spend their first 30 years of life. And it's the estuary of the ocean, right? It's where life is born. And it was riddled with plastic. And we actually got into little boats and motored into the middle of it and rowed into the middle of it and then snorkeled in it. And the result of that was that they saw that their arguments that that pouch has a better LCA misses some of the big points of the impact of life, ours and others. And so there's a change, Kevin. It's getting closer, but it's not fast enough. And that's why I think it will never happen on its own if we wait for it to, because the economics will never play out. And we only get the environmental impacts if the economics play out. So that's why we're using policy and producer discussions to talk about cheap virgin resin. You know, do we need a virgin resin tax? Cheap disposal. And if we're going to make all these pledges, we better level set the system to work, or we're always going to be paying to force it to work. That was a long answer. Sorry. So I have a question for you guys then. One other, is there anything else you need? Like, what would you like from us? What would you like to see us saying on your behalf?
This is Matt Grondin. I'll chime in, communications manager at ecomaine. I've been doing a little bit of thinking about multifamily recycling and just you know, how to turn that corner in terms of you know, the barriers there. Is it policy? Is it access? Is it, I mean, it's probably everything, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that if you could. Yeah,
I was wondering if I had our multifamily stuff on here. I don't think so. So we have launched a whole new initiative around multifamily, and multifamily is certainly going to be a hard nut to crack. What we're trying to do is look at it not from a recycling point of view, but from how multifamily units think of themselves. So how do apartment companies classify the different types of multifamily programs? What does the apartment association think about this whole space? And then how do we address the fact that many communities treat collection from multifamily units, more than 4 multifamily unit, as commercial collection? What do we do about that? So we have a multi-million-dollar grant with the city of Atlanta where we're doing a number of testing. We also just signed, it's pretty cool, with the state of Michigan. Their grant dollars are going directly to communities that we are partnering with. So there's like a double impact in solving for multifamily in Detroit. That's also a big piece of testing in the Baltimore grant that I just mentioned. There's not going to be a uniform, whether it's, you know, a roll-off, whether it's a bag program, whether it's sometimes there's a special valet, you know, where there's a building manager that will collect bags of recyclables outside of doors. It's not going to be easy. And so I think, Matt, like, what comes to mind is, can we solve recycling for an apartment building, or do we need a better system that makes the economics viable for recycling so that we have some momentum behind us to actually solve it? I think that the projects that I've seen that to date from, like PepsiCo has invested some stuff in roll-offs for apartment buildings. It's a Band-Aid, and it's uphill subsidized Band-Aid. I think that we're not really going to see large-scale multifamily until the economics of making sure it doesn't end up in a landfill and the economics of making sure you're designing something for circularity are in place. So we're trying to solve it from that perspective, not just how do you make sure that a resident in a building can do it this day, but how do we make it work for more people more often for longer. It's not as satisfying an answer.
Thank you.
This is Troy again, and kind of related to Matt's question. One of the challenges we have, doing outreach, it's a challenge to reach into some of the disadvantaged communities, to provide a good service and provide education and support for everyone to participate in recycling equally. What are you guys doing to work on that, and how could you maybe help us do a better job?
Sure. So all of the resources that we have, I'll click through these. Troy, you accessed some of our CART grants. We even got some pedestrian walkway bins. I've been meaning to ask you about those and see how those were going. Those can be real tricky. But the CART grants are part of our resources, but so are all our online ones. So anti-contamination, all our toolkits, driver videos, all of these pieces are part of it. We also have online campaign builders. So this is a like if all you have in your program is a printer and that's it, you can use our tools to customize things specific to your region. We are working on, I think you guys all know this, like it's not just a matter of translation, it's really how do you reach other populations and the mechanism and the method that they understand. But we have in all of the things that we do, we try to make really consistent everything from our mailers to our CART tags to our top issue mailers like don't bag recyclables or no bags in the bin. We create all these and they're all available for you to download. This anti-contamination program has all sorts of checklists and resources and stats on how we can make sure that they're improved. We also started a new label maker because anyone can buy a label online, right? There's plenty of those, but it'd be nice to have it connecting to the rest of your resources. So we have that information for just drop-off containers as well as our all on those. And they're all tested against our best management practice around consumer behavior change. And then the social media kits are things. So we heard from a lot of people who were like, I'd like to have social media, but I do not have the time and I am not a designer. So there's full years worth of pre-written stuff and graphics so you can have Mother's Day and Valentine's Day. And social media is not gonna, very rarely could social media actually change the heart and mind of a non-recycler, but it is a prompt just to keep things going and to address your top issues. And then the last thing I'd say is if you're on Facebook but you're not part of our Facebook group, we have this Facebook group of recycling coordinators who are tackling issues like multifamily and serving diverse populations, and what do we know about the barriers to recycling and as they rely to socioeconomic structures, and they are there. If you're struggling to feed your family, you might not be thinking about how do I recycle my stuff. So Kevin, when you read my statement at the beginning, I kind of got choked up for a second because this has been such an emotional issue for our staff who work in and day out with cities who are just heartbroken and scared and frightened and angry and just fed up. And so what we are looking at is the social justice component. Since day one, we've tried to make sure that our grants didn't just go to target populations, but either filled in missing populations in a city or created universal rollout. Making sure that those continue is essential to our work, and we'll continue to do that.
Well, thank you very much, Keefe. A great presentation, and I look forward to working in partnership with the partnership going forward. So it was nice to have you, and if there's follow-up questions, we can certainly reach out to Keefe in the future. So thank you again, and we'll be sending an ecomaine gift your way that you can enjoy.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you guys. Please stay in touch, and I hope everyone stays well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll keep moving on. I will turn the meeting over to our chairman, Matt Frank.
Thank you very much. That was a truly great presentation by a kindred soul of ours. And I know for one, I learned a whole lot in that presentation. Moving on, first I'd like to recognize the service of those board members who've ended their service with us this year. We've lost some quality, long-time board members, and we will miss them in the future. Maxine Beecher from South Portland, Alan Bradstreet from Parnell, Dave Morton from Casco, Don Hamill from Scarborough, and Paul Smith from Gorham. Thank you all for your commitment and services to ecomaine and your communities. We hope that your post-ecomaine life will treat you well. Each of you also has been sent a gift of appreciation from ecomaine. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to our committee chairmen for their report. First, I'd like to ask Eric Street to please present the Financial Committee's report for fiscal year 2020.
Matthew, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to present this today. The Finance and Audit Committee was active this year, and just like to report out on a few of the highlights that the committee had to work with. The investment portfolio for the cash reserve investment policy was amended to extend the investment services provided by HM Payson for another 5 years. The committee had been quite happy with their services and HM Payson has provided to us. So hats off to them, and we, as I mentioned, we are very pleased with their services and look forward to continuing to work with them. The committee also reviewed and the board accepted an audit report for fiscal year 19. RKO provided a clean opinion and reported there were no significant audit findings. A formal RFP and interview process was conducted by the Audit Sub-Selection Committee, and RKO was selected to be used for the fiscal year 20 audit. So we will continue to work with them. The board also approved the fiscal year 21 budget last month, which included some financial relief to owner communities. So they are sensitive to these different conditions and times that we are currently in. We feel that the budget is responsible and one that will continue to keep our organization financially sound. The committee would also like to report that at this point, the fiscal year 20 financial statements are expected to show a decrease in operating revenue, but a net income will come close to what was budgeted. We'd also like to recognize that with the circumstances before us, we will likely be faced with financial challenges going forward. So individually, all of our communities are faced with different things at this time. So ecomaine and our committees remain committed to deal with these financial challenges in a responsible manner. So with that, I'd like to thank ecomaine staff for their support to the Audit and Finance Committee. I'd like to thank the members of the committee for their service. And with that, Matthew, that concludes the Financial Committee report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Next, I'd like to turn to Caleb Hemphill of the Outreach and Recycling Committee report. Caleb, you're on.
Thank you, Matthew. Good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to present the highlights of the Outreach and Recycling Committee's activities for fiscal year 2020. We experienced record-breaking numbers in our direct personal contact with more than 53,000 people through tours, virtual tours, presentations, events, and a new category this year, remote learning due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is 37% more than last year's previous high water mark of contacts, which was 38,000. Good job. A continued focus on strategic partnerships with the Maine Red Claws, the Maine Mariners, the Common Ground Fair, Boys and Girls Clubs, and schools, organizations, and businesses in each of our members' communities. ecomaine was consistently sought out as a trusted source of recycling and sustainable waste management information by local, state, regional, and national media, appearing in news stories that Kevin mentioned earlier more than 150 times. That's a lot of work. Following our significant earned media and in-person connections, online engagement was also up in fiscal year 19. ecomaine.org saw a significant increase of 34% in our traffic to remote learning activities and resources. Facebook followers increased by 19%. Instagram followers increased remarkably by 53%. Twitter followers grew by 15%. And the Recyclopedia stands at 4,155 downloads and more than 211,000 specific items searched. For our outreach programs, the annual open house drew an all-time high of more than 1,500 guests. We handed out 19 Eco Excellence Awards this year. Out of 28 entries, we paired 6 more artists with ecomaine silver bullet containers to paint and promote public awareness of the importance of recycling. We gave $25,000 in recycling grants to 20 schools as part of the ecomaine school recycling grant program. We also selected Falmouth High School as the winner of the Upcycle 2020 Challenge for their design of hair ties from old clothing. ecomaine partnered with Falmouth, Scarborough, South Portland, and Wyndham on an 8-week recycling contamination internship last summer. The project led to many local headlines and reached more than 4,000 homes in our communities with great media and word of mouth exposure as well. We also launched Worth the Wait, a social media campaign to promote backyard composting, which reached more than 12,500 users on Facebook in just the first month. That concludes my committee report on fiscal year 19 on the Outreach and Recycling Committee. I'd also take this opportunity to thank staff, Matt, Katrina, Vanessa, and Lena have been very helpful with outreach and public relations for ecomaine, along with Denise and Kevin and the members of our community, of our committee. I thank them very much. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Caleb. A good report and a good job that you've done over the last years.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask Troy Moon to please present the report of the Nominating Committee. This is my last act as a lame duck.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Our nominating committee met on May 18th to discuss nominations for members of the leadership team for the upcoming year. We like to thank all of the board members who completed the questionnaires that Kevin and Denise sent out to calculate interest in participating in the upcoming year as an officer. Now, if I can get my screen back to where it's supposed to go. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So the nominating committee met, as I mentioned, and the committee is recommending the following officers to the board of directors for 21. So Mike Shaw as chair, Eric Street as vice chair, Bill Shane as treasurer and chair of the Finance and Audit Committee, Greg LaRue, vice chair of the Finance and Audit Committee, Caleb Hempel as secretary and chair of the Outreach and Recycling Committee, and Jeff Armatrudo, vice chair of Outreach and Recycling Committee, and Matthew Frank as our outgoing president and now past president. And I'd like to thank the other members of the nominating committee, Linda Boudreau, who was chair and asked me to fill in for her today, Deb Cabana and Rod Regier, as well as myself, who were the committee. And that concludes our report. And I'll hand it back to Matthew.
Thank you, Troy. Are there any nominations from the floor? Hearing none, I would like to call for a motion to approve the 3 items at this time. The slate of officers is presented. The committee assignments included in your agenda, and the approval of the May minutes. Can I have a motion?
I'd move that, make that motion, Matthew.
Thank you, Troy. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Caleb. I'll now ask Denise to call a roll call vote of the committee members.
Dennis Abbott,
Yes.
Jeff Armatudo, Ann Bilodeau,
Yes.
Linda Boudreau, Christopher Branch,
Yes.
Heather Brown, Caitlin Brusco, Deb Cabana, John Cloutier,
Yes.
Dave Durrell,
Yes.
Matthew Frank,
Yes.
Jamie Garvin,
Yes.
James Hager, he's on the line.
Yeah.
Caleb Hempel,
Yes.
Greg LaRue,
Yes.
Jared Maxfield, Maureen McDevitt, she's there. Troy Moon,
Yes.
Courtney O'Donnell, Heidi Richards, Rod Regier, Bill Shane,
Yes.
Maurice St. Clair, Mike Shaw,
Yes.
Eric Street,
Yes.
Matthew Sturgis,
Yes.
Roy Wood,
Rob Wood, yes.
Rob Wood, I'm sorry.
Hi, Denise.
We have a Roy here.
Okay.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. My judgment is that the yeses have it in this vote. I'd like to take a moment to say what a pleasure it's been to be your chair for the past 2 years. My years as chairman, vice chairman, and treasurer have given me a good understanding of how ecomaine works, and I can say with confidence that it works quite well. We should all be proud of the programs and progresses that we've made. As I have been known to say in the past, it speaks volumes about our organization. That I, from tiny Harrison, can serve in the role that I have this year, along the side of good people from Portland, South Portland, and other communities and towns that might have a few more people than the 2,700 in Harrison. And no, the town was not named after our speaker today, but actually after Harrison Otisfield, and I defy anybody to know who he was, but I've actually done the research and know. I have enjoyed working with all of you who served on the board of directors, as well as those on the ecomaine staff that have gotten to know over the last few years. This organization, in my experience on the board, has been a rewarding one. Coming from a career at the American Stock Exchange, I found ecomaine to be Really an amazing organization operating in a very interesting industry. So thank you for the opportunity to serve as your chairman. With that, I take great pleasure in turning the mic over to the incoming chairman, who I know will do a tremendous job. Congratulations to my good friend, Mike Shaw.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I really appreciate that. And thank you to this board. I think all of you know that I enjoy being part of this group. And I'd like to single out Matthew for his leadership over the past few years. I can tell you that I have witnessed firsthand his level of dedication and commitment to serving the committee and ecomaine. He was almost able to hand over the reins of a very upbeat positive note until the last few months. So thank you, Matthew, for covering during these uncertain times. As a token of our appreciation, we will be giving you an ecomaine jacket, which I'm sure you will wear with pride in the future. Now, as Kevin mentioned, the current reality in waste management does, of course, have challenges that lie ahead. Probably nothing new, not really much different than the challenges we are facing in our own communities. But I'm honored to have the opportunity in an organization that takes these challenges seriously, addresses them with long-term strategies, as always, has always stays nimble enough to make the necessary adjustments, as we've seen in just the last few weeks, and that ensures good results for our member communities. One opportunity that I'm excited about is the investment we're making in electric trucks. Along with my fellow board members, including Chris Branch and Eric Street, I had the opportunity this year to take an up-close look at the all-electric trucks, heavy-duty trucks, and this is truly leading-edge technology. And in fact, in ecomaine's case, the power to run these trucks will come from trash generated by our member communities that makes this opportunity extra special and unique. I think it's something certainly to be proud of, and it's a strategy that the entire industry is watching very closely. So congratulations to ecomaine, again, being on the leading edge. So here's hoping that next year's annual meeting will be pandemic-free. And when we get together for that celebration, we'll all be able to take a look at the electric hauling trucks up close and personal. Thank you again, and I look forward to serving and working with you all. And with that, I will call a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Seconded.
We have a motion and a second, and with that, we can end the meeting. And I wish you all a great afternoon, and look forward to working with you all in the next upcoming year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Be safe, everybody.